That morning felt like any other. The sky was pale blue, the streets were busy, and life was moving at its usual pace. People were rushing to work. Children were laughing on their way to school, and somewhere coffee machines were hissing in cozy kitchens. Nothing felt strange. Yet if anyone had paid closer attention, they might have noticed that the birds were missing from the sky. It wasn't something most people noticed at first. The world was too used to noise, the sound of engines, music, chatter. But the absence of birdsong made the air feel heavy, as if something invisible was pressing down on everything. A few early risers did notice it. A farmer in Australia, a jogger in Canada, a fisherman on the coast of Norway. They all stopped what they were doing for a moment, looking around, feeling a chill that didn't come from the air. Across the globe, little oddities began to appear, small things that didn't seem connected. A ship in the Pacific reported its navigation system flickering off for 10 minutes, then returning as if nothing had happened. In New York, subway clocks started showing random times, resetting themselves every few seconds. In Tokyo, an entire row of streetlights blinked in perfect rhythm before going dark. Scientists noticed, of course, but dismissed it as simple malfunction, a temporary technical glitch. After all, technology fails all the time. No one thought it meant anything larger. By noon, however, the unease had spread. The strange part wasn't that things were breaking. It was that they were all breaking together. Air traffic control systems in multiple countries began losing radar contact with planes. Pilots' instruments went blank, then reappeared a few minutes later showing different coordinates. A few flights were delayed, some grounded. News channels picked up the story but treated it lightly. Just a technical hiccup, they said. No need to panic. Yet, deep down, a quiet fear was starting to grow. By evening, people all over the world began sharing short videos on social media. In one, a group of children were pointing at the sky, confused. There were no clouds, no birds, not even the faint trace of an airplane trail. Just pure stillness. In another video, a man held up his phone and whispered, "Listen." The only thing you could hear was wind and his breathing. No distant hum of cars, no echoes of life, just silence. Then at exactly 9:17 p.m. UTC, it happened. Every satellite orbiting Earth, thousands of them, stopped sending signals at the same time. Phones, TVs, internet routers, GPS devices all went dark. Within seconds, communication between continents collapsed. The world didn't just lose connection. It lost its sense of direction. Cities that had been glowing with lights moments earlier began flickering out, one by one, until only pockets of dim light remained like scattered embers on a dying fire. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't the peaceful kind, not the kind that comes with rest. It was the sort that made people's skin crawl, as if the world itself was holding its breath. In a small apartment somewhere in Europe, a young student stood by her window and watched the skyline fade into darkness. She pressed her hand against the glass, trying to understand why the streetlights weren't coming on. She could still see the moon, faint and silver, but it looked wrong, bigger somehow and oddly still. Her phone screen was black, no signal, no internet, no way to reach anyone. Down below, people were stepping out of their homes, looking around with the same confusion. In hospitals, machines began to fail. Doctors and nurses rushed from room to room, trying to keep patients alive with manual equipment. Pilots flying commercial jets suddenly lost contact with control towers. They circled helplessly, trying to find a safe place to land using only their instincts. Emergency services everywhere were flooded with calls they couldn't answer. The world was trapped in its own darkness. And through it all, there was no thunder, no explosion, no earthquake, nothing that could explain it. Some believed it was a cyber attack. Others thought it was a solar storm. A few whispered that it was something far greater, something not of this world. Whatever it was, it didn't behave like anything science could explain. Electricity hadn't just shut off. It had paused like a film frozen mid-frame. Clocks had stopped ticking, yet people's heartbeats continued. It was as if time itself had stumbled. In the countryside, far from the cities, the silence was even more eerie. The wind had stopped blowing. Trees stood perfectly still, their leaves unmoving. Lakes and rivers looked like mirrors, untouched by even the smallest ripple. The earth felt suspended, caught between moments. Some animals sensed it too. Dogs refused to bark. Cattle gathered tightly together, birds remained hidden. Nature itself seemed to be waiting. By the next morning, no one could deny it anymore. Something had gone terribly wrong. The news channels that still managed to broadcast through local radio repeated the same line. "We are experiencing a global technical disruption. Please remain calm." But people were not calm. They were frightened, confused, and desperate for answers. In one small control room buried deep beneath a mountain in Switzerland, a group of scientists stared at a wall of blank monitors. They were part of a team that monitored satellite orbits, and for years nothing like this had ever happened. Every signal they tried to send bounced back with the same strange error. No response. The satellites were there, they just weren't speaking. Then something else happened that made the silence even worse. At precisely noon the next day, all aircraft instruments across the world froze again for exactly 1 minute. When they restarted, the planes were still flying, but their locations had shifted by several kilometers without explanation. It was as if space itself had shifted slightly beneath them. Governments began to hold emergency meetings. Scientists debated theories. The public was told to stay indoors, though no one could explain why. Theories spread faster than truth ever could. Some claimed the Earth's rotation had slowed. Others believed we had crossed into some kind of energy field. A few said this was the start of something predicted long ago, a global reset. Through it all, the most unsettling detail remained the same. There was still no sound from the sky. Even the stars seemed dimmer, as if their light was struggling to reach us. Every night people stood outside, staring upward, hoping to see something move, a plane, a comet, a blinking satellite. Nothing did. Days passed, and that silence became a presence in itself. It crept into people's dreams, into their routines. Radios played static. Clocks ticked out of sync. Even the tides behaved oddly, rising and falling at the wrong hours. The world wasn't ending, but it wasn't the same world anymore. Somewhere deep underground, one observatory still had a working telescope. The scientists there watched the heavens, waiting for a sign. What they saw made their hands tremble. The stars weren't just fading, they were aligning. Patterns began forming across constellations that had never been connected before. It was as though something vast and ancient was moving behind the curtain of space, rearranging the lights. No one could explain it. No one dared to say it aloud, but everyone felt it. The universe had noticed us. And while people prayed, argued, or stared into the silent sky, a strange understanding began to form among them. They didn't know what was coming next, but they all felt the same truth deep inside. The earth had gone still, and whatever peace had once existed in the heavens was gone. The world was waiting for something to begin. The second day began quietly, too quietly. The world had never known this kind of silence before. It was not the peaceful kind that brings rest, it was heavy and strange, as if something had stolen the heartbeat of the planet. In every city, people woke up and realized their clocks had stopped again during the night. The time on every phone, every wall clock, every computer screen was different. No one knew which one was right. For some reason, that small detail frightened people more than anything else. Time was something humans could always trust, something that never failed. Yet now it felt broken, and that made the world feel fragile. At first, there was hope that electricity would return. People kept flipping switches, pressing power buttons, waiting for a small light to appear. Nothing did. Cars sat dead in driveways. Traffic lights stayed frozen. Elevators stood still between floors. Even the hum of refrigerators, the quiet background sound most people never notice, was gone. The silence was total. Some tried to keep life going. Street vendors opened their stalls even without customers, sitting quietly beside them. Neighbors gathered in front of buildings, talking softly, sharing food that was beginning to spoil. In many places, the sky remained pale and empty, and it almost felt like the world had slipped into a different kind of dream. By afternoon, the first real fear began to show. Hospitals were running out of power for their backup generators. People carried patients into the streets where the air was fresher and tried to care for them with hand fans and candles. Firefighters used buckets instead of hoses. Police officers patrolled on foot because their vehicles wouldn't start. In the middle of all this, a strange thing began happening. People started to look at each other differently. Without the distractions of sound and screens, faces looked more real, tired, scared, human. Strangers shared water, shared stories, even shared silence. They didn't need to speak much. Just being together made it easier to breathe. Then something happened that no one could explain. Around sunset, every single machine on Earth, whether it ran on battery, engine, or current, shut off at the exact same second. Watches stopped ticking, cars froze mid-turn, trains stopped on their rails, and airplanes in mid-air began gliding silently, like huge birds with no wings to flap. In the sky, people saw hundreds of glowing trails where planes were gliding down in silence. It wasn't chaos, it was eerie calm. The air itself felt thicker, heavier, as though the atmosphere was holding its breath. For one entire hour, no machine worked anywhere on the planet. People began to panic, but only briefly. Then the strangest thing happened. No one could hear their own voices echo. Sound seemed to fall flat, disappearing before it reached far. It was like speaking underwater. Even shouting felt small, powerless. That was the moment people realized it wasn't just the machines that had gone silent. It was the Earth itself. Some people knelt to the ground and pressed their ears to the soil. No rumble, no vibration. The deep pulse of the planet, the one that usually hums beneath everything, was gone. And then, as suddenly as it had stopped, the world restarted. Lights flickered for a second in a few buildings. A few engines roared back to life. A couple of radios made a weak crackling noise before going dead again. Whatever had stopped everything had let go, but not completely. It was like the world was slowly waking up from a faint, still dizzy, still unsure of its own heartbeat. Scientists who were still trying to collect data noticed something impossible. Every electronic device that came back on had recorded the same missing hour. It wasn't just the machines that stopped, the very measure of time had paused. Clocks, digital or mechanical, all showed the same frozen moment before resuming again. People started calling it the hour the machines slept. News reporters, those few who still had working microphones, shared stories from across the world. A train in India had stopped perfectly between two stations, and then resumed an hour later without anyone touching it. A hospital in Brazil had lost every reading on its medical monitors, but none of the patients had changed. Their hearts kept beating even though the machines said they didn't. The most mysterious event came from the oceans. Ships drifting across the Atlantic reported that the water had gone completely still during that hour. No waves, no movement, no current. It was as if the sea had turned to glass. Fishermen told stories of seeing their reflections perfectly clear beneath their boats, deeper than any human eye should see. For one brief hour, they said, the sea had stared back. No one could explain it. Some said it was a global magnetic shift. Others believed it was the start of a natural reset, a strange cosmic cycle that happened once in 1,000 years. There were whispers, too, soft, fearful ones, that it wasn't natural at all, that maybe something far above had pressed pause. When the power came back in small bursts later that night, relief swept over everyone. People cheered, hugged, cried. The joy of seeing light return after so much darkness felt holy. But that joy didn't last long. Within minutes, the power cut out again, then returned, then vanished once more. The world had become unstable, flickering like a dying candle. Every burst of light carried a new layer of fear. People began to wonder if this was the end of something bigger than they could imagine. In those flickering hours, life looked both ancient and new. People built small fires, cooked together, told stories. They looked up at the dark sky and saw something even more unsettling. None of the stars were twinkling anymore. The sky looked flat like a painting. The stars were there, but lifeless, steady points of light without their usual shimmer. Children pointed and asked what was wrong with them. Adults had no answer. Astronomers who still had manual telescopes couldn't find movement. It was as if the heavens themselves had gone still, following the earth into its strange slumber. The next morning, the world felt heavier again, not because of what was happening outside, but because of what was happening inside people. There was a deep quiet in everyone's hearts. Some couldn't eat. Some couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear of death, it was something deeper, something like grief for a world that no longer worked the way it used to. And yet, in that strange grief, a quiet strength began to appear. People started helping each other more naturally. They shared food, comforted strangers, and watched over the elderly. The crisis had stripped away everything extra. No screens, no headlines, no noise, leaving only what mattered most: human connection. Even so, no one could stop wondering what had caused it. Governments tried to stay calm. Radio operators who managed to get signals through shortwave frequencies said something even stranger. The signals that left Earth were bouncing back stronger than before. like echoes from something unseen in space. Then came the reports of strange lights. In different corners of the world, over deserts, oceans, mountains, people saw thin lines of white light sliding across the sky. They moved too slowly to be meteors, too straight to be lightning. Some said they looked like cracks in glass, glowing faintly before fading away. Astronomers claimed they were atmospheric distortions caused by magnetic shifts. Ordinary people didn't buy it. They could feel that something larger was unfolding, something no one could name. That evening, as the sun began to set again, something happened that everyone would remember for the rest of their lives. The sky, which had been clear and pale all day, started to shimmer faintly, as if waves of invisible energy were passing through it. Birds that had been silent suddenly took flight all at once, moving in great circles. Dogs began to howl in every neighborhood, and then for a brief moment the stars blinked. All of them. At the same time, it lasted less than a second, but the entire world saw it. After that, people began sleeping in groups. No one wanted to be alone. There was safety in numbers, even if no one knew what they were hiding from. For the first time in human history, every person on Earth felt connected by one single, unspoken thought. Something is watching us. Scientists worked through the night with what little power they had left. They couldn't agree on a single explanation. It was not a solar storm. It wasn't a computer virus or an EMP. Something far older, deeper, and quieter was happening. By dawn, one conclusion began to form, not a scientific one, but a feeling that spread everywhere. The machines hadn't failed. They had obeyed something greater than science, something that demanded silence from the entire world. It wasn't just the hour the machines slept. It was the hour the universe listened, and humanity, without even realizing it, had begun to whisper back. The third day began with the same silence, but this time, the silence felt alive. It was no longer empty, and it was listening. People had stopped waiting for things to return to normal. The truth was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a power failure. It was something far beyond anything human hands could fix. The sun rose weakly, a pale, cold disk in the sky casting no warmth. The wind had gone still again. The air felt heavy, like it was filled with unspoken words. Across the world, scientists, soldiers, and ordinary people tried to do the same thing, to understand. Why had everything stopped? What could cause every machine, every satellite, every tiny piece of human technology to pause at once? Most governments stayed quiet. No one wanted to admit they didn't know the answer. Behind closed doors, world leaders sat in dark rooms lit by candles and battery lamps, listening to experts argue. Some said it was a natural disaster in space, a solar burst, a wave of radiation. Others believed Earth had entered some strange magnetic pocket. A few even whispered about contact, not human contact, but something else. Then came the moment that changed everything. At exactly 3:02 in the afternoon, every radio in the world, working or not, came to life for the first time since the silence began. It wasn't a voice that came through. It was a sound. A slow, pulsing rhythm, soft at first, like a heartbeat under deep water. Everywhere, people froze when they heard it. Farmers in open fields dropped their tools. Children stopped mid-play. Scientists turned toward their radios in disbelief. The sound wasn't random. It had pattern, shape, and intention. It was almost musical, but not quite. It carried something that felt like emotion. For 3 minutes, the sound filled the air, repeating the same pulse over and over. 4 slow beats, a pause, then 3 quick ones, then it ended. The world held its breath. At first, people didn't know if it was real. Many thought it was some kind of echo, maybe a glitch in the frequency. But when the same sound replayed exactly 10 minutes later, every doubt disappeared. It wasn't an accident. It was a message. Radio stations across the globe began recording it, studying it, trying to decode the strange pattern. Some countries warned people not to panic, claiming it was interference. Others stayed silent. But in one small research center high in the mountains, a group of scientists worked through the night, replaying the signal again and again. They found something hidden inside it. Beneath the rhythm, faint and buried deep in the static, there was a second layer, a pulse of higher frequency, almost like a whisper underneath the heartbeat. No human ear could hear it directly, but when slowed down, it formed a sequence. It wasn't music. It wasn't noise. It was language. The team isolated it, cleaned the static, and played it back slowly. It wasn't words, not the kind humans spoke, but it carried structure, a repeating pattern of rising and falling tones, too precise to be random. When translated into mathematical values, the pattern formed one short sentence. It said, "Witness the reset." The room went completely quiet. No one spoke for several minutes. The only sound was the soft crackle of the radio still catching faint echoes. Some of the scientists refused to believe it. "It's coincidence," one said. "Random code shaped by interference." But deep down, everyone knew it wasn't random. Before they could report their findings, something else happened. At 3:30 a.m. local time, the signal returned one last time, stronger, clearer, louder. The same heartbeat rhythm, pulsing like the earth itself was responding. Then the lights in the room flickered once, twice, and went out completely. When power returned a few minutes later, every computer in the facility displayed the same message on the screen. In plain white text, "We are beginning." It wasn't possible. None of the systems were connected to the internet. The facility had been isolated since the blackout began. Yet somehow the message appeared everywhere, even on devices that had been turned off. They checked the servers, the radio equipment, everything. No trace of a signal could be found afterward. It was as if the message had never existed, yet everyone there saw it. The story spread quietly at first. Those who heard it didn't know whether to believe it. But when the signal repeated again across the world that same morning, every doubt vanished. This time it lasted almost 10 minutes. The same heartbeat, the same rhythm, the same quiet power that seemed to reach not just the ears but the chest, like something was speaking directly to the pulse of life itself. People reacted in very different ways. Some fell to their knees and prayed. Others shouted in the streets, demanding answers. Many simply listened, eyes wide, their fear mixed with something else and wonder. After the transmission ended, something extraordinary happened. The ground trembled. Not violently, but enough for people to feel it everywhere. The kind of vibration that travels through the soles of your feet and into your bones. Windows rattled but didn't break. Birds suddenly burst from the trees in massive flocks. Ocean waves rolled higher but didn't crash. It felt like the whole planet had sighed. For a few seconds, a deep hum filled the air, like a low note from a massive unseen instrument. Then it stopped and silence returned once. More scientists across the world agreed on one thing. The sound did not come from Earth. The pattern of frequencies showed that it originated from far above the atmosphere and somewhere between Earth and the Moon. That discovery sent shockwaves through every government and research organization still operating. If the message wasn't human, then who had sent it? And why now? Many theories began to spread. Some said it was an automated signal from an ancient probe, finally reaching us after centuries. Others believed it was a warning, a countdown, or even a form of communication from something that existed beyond our understanding. Still, one strange detail tied every version of the story together. The pulse of the message perfectly matched the natural rhythm of a human heartbeat. This was not just noise. It was personal. In many places, the world's fear turned to quiet awe. People gathered in open fields and rooftops at night, hoping to hear the signal again. Some said they could feel it even when the radios were silent, a faint vibration in the air, like the world itself was whispering beneath the noise. Meanwhile, the scientists who had first translated the hidden words disappeared from public view. Their research facility went dark. When investigators arrived days later, they found the equipment neatly turned off, papers missing, and a single sentence written on a whiteboard. We listened, and it answered. No one ever found out what truly happened to them. Days passed, but the effects of the signal lingered. People started noticing strange patterns in nature. Birds flying in perfect circles, tides rising and falling in sync with the mysterious pulse. Even power returning for short bursts at exact 10-minute intervals, as if following an unseen schedule. At night, when the world was quiet, many swore they could still hear the faint echo of the message, not through radios but in their own chests, so in their heartbeat. It wasn't loud. It wasn't scary. It was steady, calm, rhythmic, like something vast was breathing in harmony with the earth. Then, one final thing happened before the world truly began to change. In the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a satellite dish, one of the few still functioning, picked up the last known transmission. This time it was only 2 words. The signal came clear, direct, and in a tone no human voice could produce. It said, "You are ready." After that, silence returned. Permanent this time, no more signals, no more strange hums. The stars remained dim. The world held still, waiting. But something deep inside every living being had shifted. Even without machines, without power, without explanation, humanity knew something ancient had spoken to them. The day the earth went still, something out there had looked back. And when it did, it didn't sound angry. It sounded like it was waiting for us to understand. That was the last transmission, the one that made every heart beat just a little differently from that day forward. The fourth day arrived, but it didn't look like morning anymore. The sun rose late, dim and pale, hanging low like a tired lamp behind fog. For the first time, people noticed that the sunlight didn't fall evenly. It came in soft waves, flickering faintly as though something invisible was moving between the earth and the sky. The world had grown quiet again, but not empty. The silence now felt heavy with expectation, as if the planet itself was waiting for something to happen. No one spoke loudly anymore. Even children, usually full of energy, played in hushed tones, sensing that the air itself carried weight. After the strange message, the one that said, "You are ready," people started looking at the sky differently. No one trusted it. It no longer felt infinite. It felt like something that could break. Scientists still working in observatories noticed strange readings. Instruments that tracked magnetic fields showed impossible spikes. Compasses spun in random directions. Birds lost their sense of direction and flew in uneven patterns before disappearing entirely. Then came the reports. From Iceland to Chile, from deserts to islands, people began seeing something unusual on the horizon. A thin, bright line stretching across the sky like a crack in glass. It was faint at first, a shimmer that only appeared at dawn and dusk. But each day it grew clearer, brighter, longer. By the fifth day it covered half the visible sky. At first people thought it was just a reflection of sunlight, or maybe an aurora caused by magnetic activity. But then one night the line moved. Slowly it curved downward, bending toward the earth in a way no natural light ever should. Cameras couldn't capture it. Screens stayed blank, showing only static. But those who looked up with their own eyes saw it clearly. The sky itself was folding, bending inward as if two invisible hands were pressing it from above. The change was subtle at first. Clouds stopped drifting naturally and began curving toward the center of the bright line. Stars appeared distorted, as if viewed through rippling water. Airplanes that had managed to stay grounded refused to take off. Pilots said the air currents were unpredictable, twisting in directions that didn't make sense. Somewhere in a mountain valley, a group of scientists gathered around their last working telescope. What they saw made them fall silent. The sky wasn't just bending, it was reflecting. They could see the same stars twice, mirrored faintly as though space itself was folding over. Word spread fast. People across the world took to rooftops, hills, and beaches, watching the strange light pulse above. The horizon shimmered like heat waves, and then, for a brief few seconds, everything stopped moving. The wind, the waves, even the clouds, all frozen. Then the light exploded outward, not in sound, not in force, but in brilliance. The whole sky lit up in colors no one had ever seen before, colors that didn't belong to any spectrum. Some described it as liquid gold mixed with shades that had no names. It wasn't fire. It wasn't lightning. It was like the universe had pulled back a curtain to reveal something behind it. For hours, people stood in silence, watching. No one screamed. No one ran. They just stared, breathless, feeling small and awed. It was terrifying, but not in the way of danger. It was the fear of standing before something too vast to understand. Then, as quickly as it came, the light folded back into the crack, and the sky returned to its pale gray stillness, except now, everything on Earth had changed. Oceans began moving in strange rhythms, tides reversing direction for a few hours each day. Rivers that once flowed calmly began to slow, as if confused about which way to go. Plants started blooming out of season. In some places, the air shimmered faintly with invisible static, making hair stand on end and metal hum softly. It was as though the planet was trying to find its balance again after being twisted. In some unimaginable way, governments called it a magnetic anomaly. Scientists called it spatial distortion. But ordinary people just called it the fold. The fold became the new word for everything strange that followed. Radios began catching whispers again, Not voices, just soft tones like wind passing through hollow metal. Some people claimed the tones matched their heartbeat. Others said they could sense when the fold was active, like a low vibration beneath their feet. Everywhere, people began having the same dream. They dreamed of standing in an endless plain under a sky split open, watching a light so bright that it didn't hurt to look at. A voice, not loud but steady, spoke a single word. Remember. No one knew what it meant. But everyone remembered the dream. People who had never met described the same thing in detail. The same landscape, the same voice, the same strange calm. It felt as though something was trying to tell humanity not to panic, to watch, to learn. Over the next few days, more signs appeared. The northern lights began to show even in countries near the equator, glowing gently across the horizon at night. Colors shifted slowly, green fading to blue, then to red, then to a soft golden hue before disappearing. For a brief moment, Earth looked otherworldly. People gathered outside to watch, no longer afraid. They sat on rooftops, beaches, and hillsides holding candles or lanterns. They didn't need words. The lights above told them enough, that whatever was happening, it wasn't chaos anymore. It was a kind of transformation. Still, the scientists kept searching for logic. They compared the energy patterns and realized something incredible. The fold lines matched the shape of the Earth's magnetic field. It was as if the planet's protective shield had inverted, turning inside out for a moment, then settling back in a new configuration. That night, the air smelled clean, fresh, like the world had just been washed by invisible rain. Then came the sound. It started faint, like the hum of wind against mountains, but soon it grew deeper, more resonant. It didn't come from above or below, it came from everywhere. The ground, the air, even the water carried the same tone, soft and constant, vibrating through every living thing. People began to notice that the sound seemed to follow their emotions. When they were calm, it softened. When they were afraid, it grew louder. It was almost as if the earth itself was trying to comfort them. No one could explain how or why, but for the first time in days, people stopped feeling hopeless. They didn't have answers, but they had something else: peace. It was strange, almost ironic. The day the sky folded and the heavens burned with light should have been terrifying, yet it brought a kind of unity. For once, people forgot about borders, wealth, language, and power. Every person was the same under that new sky, small, fragile, and humbled. There were no more arguments, no fights over resources. Even in the largest cities, people shared food and warmth. Families opened their doors to strangers. It was as though the universe had forced everyone to remember what it meant to be human. As the days passed, the fold slowly faded. The crack in the sky grew thinner, dimmer, until it disappeared altogether. Yet the memory of it remained in everyone's eyes. People looked at the world differently after that. They spoke more softly. They listened more deeply. They noticed things they had ignored before. The way wind moved through trees, the way stars blinked faintly at night. The world had become slower, gentler, and though no one could explain what had happened, a quiet understanding spread across humanity. Whatever had come through the fold hadn't come to destroy. It had come to remind. The universe had whispered once, and Earth had listened. From that day on, nothing, not even silence, felt empty anymore. The sky had folded and healed, but humanity had changed forever. Some said the world had been reset. Others said it had been forgiven. But deep down, people simply felt that the heavens had finally seen them and decided to let them start again. The fold had closed, but the world did not return to how it was. The light had faded, the skies were calm again, but there was something new in the air. People could feel it, though they could not explain it. Days passed quietly, almost too quietly. No thunder, no birds, no machines running like before. The world seemed to be resting, breathing softly after a long storm. Then came the long night. It began without warning. One evening, as people watched the sunset, the sky dimmed faster than usual. Within minutes, darkness spread across the horizon, swallowing everything. Streetlights flickered once, then went out completely. Homes lost power. Cities that once glowed like constellations turned into shadows. At first, everyone thought it was just a blackout. People brought out candles, phones, flashlights. Children laughed, thinking it was a fun power cut. But after hours passed and the moon still didn't appear, the laughter faded. It wasn't just dark, it was deep, endless, almost alive. The stars didn't show that night. Even the sky, once full of strange beauty, looked like a blank wall. No sound of wind, no crickets, no distant traffic. It was as if the world had fallen asleep with its eyes open. Fear returned, slow and silent. People gathered in groups, talking in low voices. Some prayed, others waited, hoping the sun would rise soon. Hours turned into what felt like days, but no light came. The air grew colder, sharper. Fires were lit in yards and streets to stay warm. Somewhere in the countryside, a group of farmers noticed their animals behaving strangely. Dogs refused to bark. Cows stood facing the same direction, completely still. Birds that should have been asleep flew in circles, confused. It felt like everything alive sensed something approaching, but from where no one knew. In cities, scientists tried to understand. Their instruments still worked, though many screens glowed faintly even without power. They saw something impossible. The Earth's rotation hadn't stopped, but the light of the sun simply wasn't reaching it. It was as if the world had slipped into a shadow, one that didn't belong to the normal rhythm of space. Some believed it was nature correcting itself. Others thought the fold had opened again, but in silence this time. Whatever it was, humanity could only wait. As the second day of darkness began, strange lights started to appear. Not in the sky, but on the ground. Faint blue lines glowed across rivers and roads, spreading like veins of light under the surface. They looked like living currents, moving slowly and steadily. People followed them, curious but cautious. The glowing lines led to open fields, to mountain ridges, to old forests. It was as though the planet itself was showing its heartbeat through the soil. In small towns, people began to gather near those glowing places, feeling a strange calm there. The light was soft, comforting, neither cold nor bright. Standing near it felt like being embraced by warmth, even though the air was freezing. Then something beautiful happened. When two people stood close to each other near the light, the glow brightened slightly. When a group joined hands, it grew stronger, spreading farther. People realized it responded to togetherness, to connection. Soon, whole communities stood side by side, holding hands in long chains, watching the light expand beneath them. For the first time since the darkness began, people smiled again. They couldn't see the sun, but they had created their own kind of light. The scientists who saw the same effect on sensors were speechless. They couldn't measure it, couldn't explain it. The energy had no known source. It didn't come from the ground or the sky, it came from life itself. As the long night continued, people began to adapt. They learned to live by the soft glow underfoot. Fires burned less, fear faded slowly, replaced by quiet curiosity. Families told stories again. Grandparents spoke of old legends. Children asked questions that no one could answer. Something about the darkness made people more honest. They talked about regrets, hopes, and memories they had buried for years. Without distractions, without noise, they started hearing their own hearts again. By what should have been the third morning, the air began to hum faintly. It wasn't the same sound as before, it was deeper, slower, like the earth was stretching after a long sleep. The ground trembled gently, not in fear, but like a heartbeat returning to rhythm. The blue lines brightened once more, then began to move upward. People watched in awe as tiny, glowing particles lifted into the air, rising slowly toward the sky. They looked like dust at first, then like tiny stars gathering above like a second Milky Way. And then, for the first time in many nights, a faint silver light appeared in the distance. It wasn't the sun, not yet, but something beyond the horizon glowed gently, spreading across the sky. The darkness began to thin, as if the world was remembering how to breathe light again. People cried softly. Some fell to their knees. It wasn't just relief, it was wonder. They had survived something beyond reason, and in that survival they had found unity. When the first true ray of sunlight finally returned, it was golden and warm, almost blinding. The whole planet lit up at once, every mountain, river, and street shining like it had been reborn. People stepped outside and raised their hands toward the light, feeling it on their skin, their faces, their hearts. For the first time, the sunrise didn't feel routine. It felt sacred. After the long night, everything looked different. Trees had grown faint silver lines on their bark, glowing softly in the dark. The oceans reflected light in new patterns like constellations across the waves. Even the air seemed clearer, lighter, more alive. It was as though the earth had gone through a long, deep sleep and woken up refreshed. People no longer spoke about fear. They talked about meaning. They wondered if the long night had been a test or a gift, something meant to teach them patience and connection. Governments and scientists made plans to study the changes, but the ordinary people, the ones who had stood together in the dark, already understood something deeper. They knew the world had spoken to them in silence, showing them that light wasn't something distant in the sky. It could be made right here. Between human hearts, days turned into weeks and the new earth settled into calm. Night still came, but they were never as dark as before. There was always a faint shimmer in the air, a gentle reminder of what had happened. Children grew up hearing stories of the fold and the long night, told with a mixture of fear and love. They learned that when the world went dark, people didn't disappear. They became brighter together. And so the phrase, "the day Earth went still," no longer meant fear. It became a story of how the world paused, how humanity rediscovered what it meant to care, to wait, and to hope. Even though the heavens had known no peace during those strange days, the people who lived through it found peace inside themselves. And maybe that was what the universe had wanted all along, to remind Earth that even in the deepest night, light never really leaves. It just waits for us to find it again. When the sun finally returned after the long night, people thought the story was over. They believed life would return to normal. The machines would run again, cities would glow again, and the world would forget the darkness. But deep down, everyone knew something had changed forever. The light that came back wasn't the same as before. It felt softer, more alive. When sunlight touched the ground, it didn't just shine, it seemed to breathe. In those first days after the night, people walked outside more often. They didn't hurry to work or rush to catch buses. They just stood under the open sky, feeling the warmth. The air smelled different, like clean rain, even when it hadn't rained. The earth looked new, as though the world had been washed and painted again. The blue veins that had glowed during the night were gone now, but they had left marks on the land, faint silver trails that sparkled faintly when light hit them. Some called them earth scars, others heaven's handwriting. They stretched across fields, mountains, even oceans, glowing gently like forgotten rivers of light. People began to notice small miracles. Trees that had been dry for years suddenly bloomed again. Rivers ran clearer than anyone could remember. Fish returned to places they had vanished from. Animals moved calmly through cities, unafraid of humans. It felt like the planet was healing and everyone could see it. The strange part was how people changed too. Those who had once lived only for themselves now helped their neighbors without being asked. Those who used to argue over everything now spoke gently, listening more than talking. It was as if the darkness had taken away the noise inside everyone's hearts, leaving only quiet understanding. For the first time, the whole world agreed on one thing. They couldn't go back to how things were before. The governments met together and made new promises, to care for the land, to stop fighting, to rebuild slowly and wisely. There were no more speeches about power or wealth. Only talk of balance. Even those who didn't believe in miracles admitted that something beyond human power had touched the earth. Yet not everything was peaceful. There were questions, so many questions. Scientists tried to explain the fold, the long night, the lights, the sound, the dreams. They built new machines, set up new observatories, and searched the sky day and night. But the sky, now calm and endless again, gave no answer. Some thought the heavens had closed their doors for good. Others believed they were still watching, quietly, waiting for humanity's next move. Months passed. Seasons changed. The earth grew greener than before, as though time had slowed down to let nature recover. Then one evening something new began. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky gold. People sat outside their homes watching the light fade. It was peaceful until the colors changed. Gold deepened into orange, orange melted into crimson, and crimson turned into a soft blue glow. The same kind of glow that had once appeared under their feet during the long night. This time it came from above. The blue light began as a thin line on the horizon. It spread slowly, forming circles high in the clouds like ripples in the sky. Birds flew through it unharmed but shining briefly as if dusted with starlight. People watched in awe, no longer afraid. Then the air filled with a faint hum, deep and calm, like the earth's voice returning to sing with the sky. The scientists rushed to measure it again. Their instruments went wild, energy readings higher than anything seen before, yet perfectly stable. There was no danger, only harmony. It was as if the planet and the sky were talking to each other again after a long silence. People began calling it the awakening of the sky. Every continent saw it. Every ocean reflected it. The world was bathed in that soft blue light, glowing as one living being. In small villages and big cities, people gathered in open spaces. They didn't panic. They didn't hide. They looked up together, holding hands or standing quietly, waiting for what would happen next. Then something extraordinary occurred. The light above began to take shape. Not into words or symbols, but into waves of motion, like someone was painting with light across the heavens. It moved gently, flowing like water in slow rhythm, pulsing softly in patterns that seemed to match the beat of every heart watching below. Somewhere deep within, people felt they understood it, not with their minds but with their souls. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't a threat. It was a message, simple and wordless. We see you. We remember. The sound grew richer, wrapping around every living thing like a song without lyrics. Mountains echoed softly. Oceans shimmered with reflection. Trees swayed in rhythm, though there was no wind. It was as if the entire earth was answering back. For the first time in human history, no one spoke. Not because they were afraid, but because there were no words big enough for what they felt. The light stayed through the night. People didn't sleep. They just watched, calm and wide-eyed, realizing how small and yet how connected they were to everything. Some wept quietly. Others smiled like children seeing snow for the first time. As dawn approached, the light began to fade. It didn't vanish all at once. It flowed upward, fading into stars until only the softest trace of blue remained, like a farewell written across the morning sky. Then the first sunlight broke through the clouds, golden and pure. The world glowed once more. From that day on, people noticed that the stars seemed brighter at night. They said they could feel something watching from beyond, not as rulers or judges, but as companions, old friends who had finally spoken again. The earth felt alive in a way no one could explain. Technology advanced again, but differently this time. Scientists and dreamers worked together to create things that blended with nature, not against it. Energy came from clean sources, guided by the same mysterious rhythm the planet had shown. People built fewer walls and more bridges. They shared stories of the long night, passing them to their children, not as a tale of fear, but as a memory of unity. Years later, when the blue glow sometimes appeared again for a few seconds in the sky, no one was scared anymore. People would stop whatever they were doing, look up and smile. It became a sign of hope, a reminder that they were not alone in the universe. It wasn't about gods or miracles. It was about connection, the kind that exists between life and the vastness beyond it. The day Earth went still had been terrifying. The heavens had known no peace. Yet from that stillness, humanity had learned something greater than science could ever measure: the strength of peace, the power of understanding, and the beauty of listening when the universe finally whispers. In the end, no one really knew what had happened. If the fold had been a cosmic accident, a celestial message, or a bridge between worlds. But maybe that didn't matter anymore, because after it all, the world was different. People had changed. The skies had changed. The silence that once felt like fear now felt like a heartbeat, steady, calm, eternal. Every sunrise after that carried a quiet promise that light and darkness were not enemies, but part of the same story. And though no one could explain it fully, everyone agreed on one simple truth. On that strange day when Earth went still, humanity had finally learned how to listen, and the heavens had finally found peace again.